Good morning and thank you for the opportunity. Sense a bit of a paradigm shift, some really fascinating information this morning already, so we hope we can keep it going and take some things out of this. So I'm just going to talk about using optical spray technology efficiently and then move on to double knock strategies. And I hope I'm not stealing any thunder from Tony Lockery this afternoon, but if we do double up, well, that's a good message. I suppose just a bit of history with optical sprays is that, I mean, they've actually been around for a long time. Remember Paul Nash and Warwick Felton years ago at Tamworth running around with the wasp spray, and that's probably Tony Cook's here. It's probably 20 years ago that technology has been around. So it's still an evolving part of our system, but and we're starting to use it better and better. But it's been here for a while. So I just wanted to say what do these things offer? Optical sprays, the Weedits and the weed seekers and the likes, what do they offer? Certainly they control hard to kill weeds, and that's one of the big ones. Potentially you can use higher rates and different products to target those weeds specifically and make sure you get them to stop seed set. Importantly, they save dollars by targeting those weeds specifically. And that's almost a byproduct, but it's still, an important part of funding the exercise. We sort of say that if it's done properly, you can turn dirty farms into clean ones. And we see sort of demonstrations. People who get them and use them properly do that. They get dirty farms and turn them into clean ones. They reduce the environmental pressure just by having less product going out. But one thing is, they're not drift proof. They still will drift. You've still got to be conscious of that and make smart choices. With less pressure, you've probably got less operator exposure with work health and safety. And one thing is, it's just an observation amongst growers, is that for every 5,000 hectares, economically you can probably justify one of these machines. And it means that if you're only farming 2,000 hectares or 1,500 hectares or 1,000 hectares, maybe you've got some like-minded growers that you could share an owning machine. Just as from a costing basis and getting a repayment on it. The hard to kill weeds, these are our enemies. So the first is, and the biggie is glyphosate resistant ornless barnyard grass. We've become over-reliant on glyphosate. Resistance is more and more common. And effectively, as agronomists and advisors, when we walk into a field and we see into a paddock and we see barnyard grass, we just assume it's resistant and attack it accordingly. Feather-top Rhodes grass, it's emerged quickly as an issue. From about 5 years ago, it really came in pretty hard. And it was difficult to control right from the very start. It looks nice and lush and green, but it's always difficult to kill. Sow thistle, as we heard this morning, there are definitely resistant populations through the Liverpool plains. So it's the real one that is to keep, to manage and keep an eye on. It's the emerging, serious issue that we've got. If you go down south, sort of on some of the redder soils and certainly in some of the other areas, windmill grass is serious and very difficult to manage, and flaxleaf fleabane. And you couldn't get a more classic example of competition. There's crop competition for you straight away. Just some of the legal requirements with spot spraying or optical spraying. We probably need to define, our use patterns with it. Talking to Tony Cook earlier about some of this as well. So there's a permit in place for the use, which is held by Crop Optics back from about 2010, was it? Something like that, where it was initiated. And it's due for your renewal, probably early next year. Cotton Australia have a permit for specific products for controlling volunteer Roundup Ready cotton, and New Farm have the registration specifically for their products, Nuquat, DST, Comet Trooper Alliance, Emitrol and amine. Notice that they're all for weed cover up to 30% and a minimum water rate of 100 litres per hectare. So this is just we won't dwell on it, but you can just see some of the differences. So the glyphosate formulations here are registered at about 3 to 4, well, they are registered at 3 to 4 litres under this permit, and paraquat is the same. So they're for the knockdown products. For the residuals, you note here that in this instance it's for weed cover only up to 10%, and also that the rates aren't out of the ballpark. You know, they're not really high rates. So you look at something like metsulfuron, the application rates in this instance are for 5 to 10 grams. So that's probably what you'd often be using as a normal broadacre rate. And there's a reason for that. You don't want to be overloading with residuals out of these machines. And they're the new farm rates. You notice they're much higher. So if you're using these products, then legally you've got an entitlement to use higher rates. But yeah, so just be aware of all of the legal implications of using the products, and it's all goes well until something goes wrong, and then you've got to be accountable. So I won't dwell on too much about weed seekers and weed its, but just quickly mention the machines. So the one thing with a weed seeker is that it detects reflectance from infrared and from visible red light. When they were first introduced, the unit on your left, the sensor and the nozzle used to all be in the one body. Now, in most instances, the weed seeker, the solenoid and the nozzle body are separate, which, if that distance is increased, can probably increase your ability to be able to travel a little bit faster. Other things are that they're on a 38 centimetre spacing. The nozzle's 65 degree, an 03 to an 04 even. And chasing 100 litres per hectare should give you a coarse droplet at 2 to 2.5 bar. So just a couple of examples. There's a 36 metre 3-point linkage machine on the left, made by Hayes and McGourley. On the right is a trailing weed seeker. And notice there you've got the detection unit at the front and the nozzle and the solenoid separate at the back. A weed it, so it's slightly different detection system. So rather than looking at differences in reflectance, you're actually detecting active chlorophyll, and that might have an influence on how you use it. You probably don't want to be letting weeds degrade too much. If they haven't got active chlorophyll, they mightn't pick it up quite as smartly. A couple of advantages maybe with it is that it's not affected as much by the change in background, so it doesn't require sort of continual calibration as the weed seeker would. So the light source and the nozzles are always separate in the weeded, and you can notice that the detection cameras are higher and ahead. And the camera is on a metre, so the weed seeker's on 38 centimetres. Here the camera unit is on a metre spacings, and you've got 5 nozzles that it relates to. So that's just different setups for the weed it. That's at the Mungandai AgTech Day. That's the Swarm Farm robotic vehicle with weed it mounted. And there's a 36 metre, this is a pretty typical fallow here at the moment, but it's a pretty typical crop. But that's a commercial unit sort of set up in the area. So I'll just go through some of the options with setting up an optical sprayer. So first thing is what machine? Which one do you want? Which supplier and which service level you are comfortable with? The width? Do you want a tow behind, or do you want a 3-point linkage mounted machine? Do you want 1 boom or 2 booms? you want one tank or two tanks? The nozzles and the height control. So height control is absolutely critical in it. Do you want that as a physical thing with touchdown wheels, or do you want to have it so it's hydraulically controlled? I'll come back to the one boom and the booms and the tanks here in a minute. So in talking to some, well, this is a way, sort of from the agronomist point of view, how do we see that we want to use optical sprayers? So the first could be that you put down a broadacre upfront knockdown spray, and you'll follow it with an optical spray double knock. You can use an optical sprayer as your knockdown alone, and that's essentially if you've got pretty easy weeds to control, whether it's scattered melons or peach vine or something where you just reckon they're randomly dispersed but readily, easily to control, then just the optical spray as an upfront knockdown for a start works well. Do you want to use the optical sprayer for a start and then follow it with a broadacre knockdown? Broadacre double knock rather. Often you can go in with the scattered stuff and follow it with a broadacre double knock, like a paraquat, and put the residual with it. Or you can use it for using it as a knockdown and then coming back and putting the weed seeker or the weed it over it the second time as a double knock and with the residual. So all of those different use patterns is up to the agronomist, up to the grower, and it changes the way that you can approach your weed control. The second one's really exciting the last one is exciting in fact, if we can use the optical sprayer, map where the weeds are, and then come back with the double knock and the residual, and you're only applying it on that same site. That's where, theoretically we'd like to get to. Some knockdown considerations I just thought I'd mention is on that first spray, on the first fallow spray of the summer, is to prioritise the grasses. The grasses are the things that give us the grief through a fallow spray. If you miss, say, that ornless barnyard grass first up, you'll probably end up spraying that same thing, that same plant 3 or 4 times trying to get it. And it's just frustrating. You can go back to the same site and that same plant is looking at you and you might have had 2 shots at it and a bit of paraquat, and you end up just relying on something like paraquat, which is not where we want to go. So always double knock that first grass spray. It's absolutely imperative, as I just said, to get it. And after the first one, then you clean. You start with a clean slate. You've got new weeds on your second spray. And it's easier said than done when you've got vagaries of weather and conditions. So with just one of the configurations a number of contractors run around with is if they've got 2 booms and 1 tank, what they do is they put 2/3 of the rate. So you've got 1 tank, you've just got 1 mix, but you've got say on a weed seeker, you've got the cameras, and then you've got a second boom. So you can put a 2/3 rate through the cameras, and you have a 1/3 rate running broadacre to pick up all the background. So on the weed detected areas, it's getting the full rate, but on the remainder, you're just picking up all the small ones. So you're not getting misses and escapes. And just one thing, with cameras, paraquat can be compromised by chasing big weeds. Some operational tips in talking to some growers and some clients who operate either weedits or weed seekers. Obviously the correct nozzles and the width is right. Allow for shadowing, especially if you're in short sorghum stubble or in heavy stubbles. The height is important, and to be able to control as much as you can between that 75 metres, and don't let it go above a metre if you can. So the weed seeker, interesting, defaults to on. So if it goes over a contour or if the height's not set correctly, those nozzles all switch on as they go above 1.2 metres. Yeah, so it's difficult in contour paddocks sometimes, so it takes some management. Speed is important. There's instances where you can push it out to about 20 k's, but you just got to look at the efficiency and the misses of what's happening. Certainly with contractors with that 2 booms and 1 tank scenario, they'll spray at 21, 22 k's, but they've got the luxury of having the second boom to cover things up and make sure they're not missing. In most cases, speed is kept at about 14 to 15 kilometres an hour is the sweet spot. Keep the water rate at 100. Don't spray in winds more than 15 k's, and less than 12 is ideal. And especially with crosswinds, be really careful with crosswinds not to get you into trouble. Clean the sensors every day and be fastidious about hygiene. The other thing is it's the sort of weed seeking or using the weed at sometimes seen as a non-time critical period where you're going, if they get a bit big, they're only scattered, we can still come and do it, but you still want to be able to make sure that you are using the products as efficiently as you can. So still better to come in earlier rather than later. Mention the crosswinds and choose the rates wisely. Obviously with some of the products there's a pretty wide range of rate opportunity, but don't use more than you need, and be really, really careful if you are using residuals, because if you do get multiple nozzles that fire at any one time, your rates will increase. So you don't want big areas with big weeds chasing it out and getting 3 times the rate of a residual there, because it could cause you problems later on. You know, and you've got to be careful of things even like some of the Group A's, the residuals that come out of Group A's. Some of the limitations, all the labels are there at 30%. If you've got more than 30%, it's not, the optical sprayers aren't the things for you to use. You're back to a broadacre. The one thing with speed, if you're restricted to 14 to 15 kilometres an hour as being your optimum, you can't cover the acres as quickly as you would with a normal broadacre spray. So in those periods where you're full on, there's a lot of country to cover really quickly, then usually a broadacre spray rig is the way to go. Ground engagement can be tough, so we're talking about the requirement to have really good height control. So if you've got ground engaging wheels, which a number of the machines do, in that first fallow spray after a nice big wet winter and you've got big wide cracks in these deep verticile soils, it can rattle them around a lot. And it's expensive equipment, so and it takes a higher level of expertise, so you just want to make sure you've got good operators driving them. You don't just want drivers, you want good operators. And drift is still an issue. The one thing is sometimes when you're chasing big fleabane, the research from the NGA is indicating that high rates of oil help the efficacy of some of the phenoxy products, but it will upset the pattern. So often you just got to be careful of the adjuvant rates and the oil rates coming through the machine. So just a view to the future. Really, we're talking about optical spraying and weed targeted spraying. I mean, it might just be that these machines here can be the platform for the next generation of spot spraying. Really, it can be high resolution mapping out of a satellite, out of a drone, 2 different forms of drone, or we've got someone even playing around with a gyrocopter, just trying to pick up small weeds, high resolution weeds, and then you can come back and use your own modified broadacre boom spray to target weeds on a geos referenced basis. Also, a couple of things of the future are there are alternate detection systems, like face recognition technology is on its way. And there's a couple of groups working on that. How can we use it? The green on green spraying, there's a really good video on Twitter at the moment showing the AgriFac, which has got a different camera recognition system, the AI system. So you can see them, they're the little detection unit sitting up in front, and they view about 5 metres forward, and they look at the difference in the weed shape, the structure and the contrast of the weeds. So they're all picking out the video that you see is picking out wild radish in oats, I think it is. So yeah, this sort of stuff's on its way. And it was interesting in just the Twitter feed that Peter Newman was making comments. He said there are some restrictions, but he said despite those restrictions, it still will be game changing. So some good stuff coming out. I'll just move on quickly to double knocking. And really, when we think double knock, everyone's the immediate sort of assumption is we're talking about paraquat, but there are all sorts of different ways, and I just want to just make a few points. Hopefully not stealing, as I said, any of Tony's thunder, but it's a sequential application of 2 weed control tactics in such a way that the second tactic controls any survivor of the first. There's no mention there about herbicides, really. So it's, but in our instance, we're trying to protect glyphosate by using something else that is going to stop the seed set. So there it is, stop herbicide resistance by stopping seed set. So this is just I suppose this is just to show that our whole fallow farming system we have abused glyphosate, we have got resistance, we've got problems. We don't want to fall into the trap of then relying on the next things. We're going very quickly down the path of blowing up the Group A's. So virtually a lot of the early fallow sprays now is a glyphosate plus a Group A. So it's going to, if we are over reliant on that, we're going to blow that up. And then there's the underpinning security we've got of that is to double knock it. If we lose glyphosate, if we lose Group A's, and we lose paraquat, I don't know, we're back to Kelly chains and cultivation. So we've got to be really, really careful that we manage the system. And that's just, at the moment, over the last 10 years, we use 1 litre of paraquat for every 6 litres of glyphosate sold in the district. And just on a trend line, I mean, I don't know, I think that glyphosate trend line is probably fairly consistent, but you can see our trend line of paraquat use is increasing. I'll just go on quickly about herbicides as a double knock. Paraquat was pretty much came into, the history was that there was a lot of fleabane was a problem, with a lot of cotton around and concerns about the use of, legitimately so, use of 2,4-D. Fleabane emerged as a problem, and the way we really got on top of it was by introducing paraquat into the system as the double knock to really control, to turn that 60% job into a 98% job. And almost this, the byproduct of that was we found that it was working well on grasses. So now we've become reliant on our system, our grass control is with paraquat, and we can sort of help fleabane for showing it up for us. The downside is the double knock, it works, but it's double the workload. So virtually for every one operation of a weed spray in a fallow is now a 2-spray job. So it's double the workload, and that either means 2 booms or you and a contractor, but either which way, it takes a lot of effort and a lot of cost to do it. So in summers where it does rain here, and it often you get that wet pattern and you get the changes coming through every 10 days, it's very difficult to spray everything twice. So just a little bit of information on double knocking with paraquat, and I suppose the photos up the top showing that's Feathertop Rhodes, and if you get it right, it does work. But the timing of use with paraquat's important. The graph on the left, some data out of the NGA, indicating that, so that is on Feathertop Rhodes. The double knock at 4 days, so the blue lines are the single application with a rate of glyphosate, followed by a double knock at 4 days in the light green, the sort of yellowy green, and then the more olivey green is where the double knock was at 11 days. So there's actually an advantage there by delaying the double knock on Feathertop Rhodes. On the right hand side shows with different sites, again a non-discriminatory a discriminatory rate of glyphosate followed by different timings of paraquat, and showing that the ideal for barnyard grass was about 4 to 5 days. At 10 days, the survival was the number of barnyard grass seedlings per square metre started to increase again. So just shows the difference between the timings for different weeds with paraquat. NGA again. So here it was a trial where they showed and sort of fell on it almost by or fortuitously, well, not by mistake, but fortuitously, that the combination of Balance and Euquat worked extremely well on Feathertop Rhodes. Cultivation. It works. We sort of treat it as a bit of a desperate measure. The GRDC had to, they've got initiatives called, strategic cultivation with as a weed tool measure. It works, but we just need to be careful. Don't have it as a short-term fix, whereas it might be causing longer-term problems. Seedling emergence decreases with depth, but seed survival, the persistence of the weed increases. And just quickly on this graph, the two largest seeded species out of this being barnyard grass and liverseed grass are the two lines at the top. So you can see at 24 months, you still had 20% survival of seed when it was buried down to 10 centimetres, whereas on the surface there was no survival. So if you bury it, you might get rid of it short term, but larger seeded species are going to last longer. So potentially livestock. We've got rid of all our fences up here. Sheep are good foragers, but maybe technology is going to be part of the solution. There's now some really cool work going on with virtual fencing. So those big wide open areas that have got resistance problems, these things might be the solution. If you've got chickpeas or faba beans, sheep are great foragers. They can do it and they'll clean up weeds at the same time. And with virtual fencing, there's no reason why you couldn't close them into certain areas or zones where you've got high weed pressure. They're doing work, the CSIRO are doing work now. Certainly they've got it with cattle, so it's probably overly priced at the moment, but and there's a lot of work to do, but it looks pretty exciting. Compaction, is that an issue for us on these soils, or is it more a loss of ground cover? Cattle and goats. So let's go from goats to blue sky thinking. As far as double knocking, Mike Walsh has I don't know whether he's talking on it today, but he certainly does some work with lasers. The microwave technology, you saw this at Mungandai. Both of these things are probably better on unmanned vehicles from a WHS point of view. Steam, electrical and robotic targeted tillage, where there are units, and Mike Widrick's certainly written a paper about it, where you've got options. You've got robotic vehicles moving, and if it detects it's the grass, it'll apply tillage, a tine or something that's spring-loaded tine that will remove it, and if it's a broadleaf, it can be a herbicide. I'd just like to acknowledge some of the people who helped me out with preparing this talk, and I'm happy to take any questions.